today. We appreciate your interest. Months ago, my legal team began preparing for a potential second Trump administration. We knew from our extensive experience during his first term that we would need to be prepared from day one if he was reelected. I know that there are many people in Washington State who are feeling a range of emotions from the presidential election results. I know that because I went on a short day hike yesterday, and multiple people on that trail stopped me on the trail to express their thoughts about the presidential election and to ask what this office in the state of Washington would be doing in preparation for the Trump presidency. I want those Washingtonians to know that the Attorney General's office has been preparing for quite some time and feel prepared to defend their freedoms and protect their rights. My team has gone line by line through Project 2025 and has been tracking remarks by President Trump on the campaign trail. We have, of course, been speaking with other attorneys general, with their legal teams, and legal directors at key organizations throughout Washington State and across the country. I'm joined today by just a few of the many folks in my office who are part of the legal team that was involved during Donald Trump's first administration. First, though, I'm really honored to introduce Attorney General-elect Nick Brown, who, of course, you all know. One thing I do want to mention is just as Rob McKenna, who was extremely gracious during my transition to become Attorney General, just as Attorney General Rob McKenna did for me after I was elected Attorney General, yesterday we appointed Nick as what's called a Special Assistant Attorney General. If I refer to a SAG, that's just an acronym for Special Assistant Attorney General. What that means from just a practical standpoint is that means we can brief him, share our legal thoughts, our legal analysis with Nick, because he is essentially a Special Assistant Attorney General. So that has happened. Additional folks from my office who are here, many of you have seen them in past press conferences. Civil Rights Division Chief Colleen Melody, First Assistant Attorney General Kristen Beneski, Solicitor General Noah Purcell, Complex Litigation Division Chief Jeff Rupert, and Environmental Protection Division Chief Bill Sherman. I'll just say their collective experience in litigating during the first Trump administration is, and this is an understatement, extensive. There is no legal team anywhere in the country, I'm confident, who has more experience winning and litigating these types of cases than the folks you see here, and of course all the team that is a part of our office throughout the state, many of whom are in the room today. So they are prepared for upcoming work that we may have. What I'm going to do is talk briefly about our preparations and the challenges we anticipate. Then we'll hear from Nick Brown, and then we're happy to take any questions that you may have. Just as a preview on the questions, and we were chatting about this upstairs, by definition, we understand you may have a lot of interest in specific topics and what would happen if something happened at the administration. For obvious reasons, it's going to be difficult to answer some of those questions in details, right? We don't want to preview our litigation strategy, for example, and at the same time, until you actually see an executive order, for example, the actual writing of that in black and white, the specific language that's used, it's difficult for us to form an opinion of it, of the legality or illegality of it, until we actually see it in writing. So by definition, we may have to be a little bit general in our responses to those legitimate and important questions. Just wanted to highlight that for all of you. So Project 2025 is, of course, a 900-page roadmap of what we can expect from a second Trump administration. We have also closely reviewed Agenda 47, which is found on President Trump's official website and contains a list of his priorities for a second term. It echoes many of the ideas fleshed out in detail in Project 2025. To be blunt, what is in Project 2025 and Agenda 47 constitutes an assault on reproductive rights, healthcare access, environmental protections, to name just a few. So speaking for myself, I'm deeply concerned, of course, by potential implementation of the policies outlined in those documents. Just a few examples. Enforcing the Comstock Act, which is a 1873 law that Donald Trump could use to try and criminalize or severely restrict abortion and birth control nationwide. Eliminating or weakening DACA, the program, of course, that protects more than 500,000 dreamers for whom the United States is the only country that they know. Rewriting federal law to remove nearly all protections for LGBTQ Americans, from education to healthcare to the workplace. Now, we do have certain tools. I'll outline those very briefly. First, of course, is litigation. And that is an important tool for challenging federal actions that we believe are illegal or unconstitutional, and keeping the administration accountable to the rule of law. Between 2017 and 2021, our legal team defeated 55 such illegal actions and policies from Donald Trump and his administration. So we lost 3 cases, 155. So our track record was obviously very positive. It's important to point out that we obviously worked with other states and Democratic AGs during those 4 years, worked very closely with those states. Washington was, of course, extremely active during those 4 terms. We were the lead state on 36 cases. The lead state, of course, is the state that essentially does all the work, right? You are drafting the briefs, you're arguing the cases before the courts. Other states assist with documents and declarations, but invariably one state is usually chosen to lead a litigation. Washington was, of course, one of the main states that did the bulk of the work during those 4 years. At the time, when Donald Trump became president in 2017, our team that could do that work was a fraction of what it is today. We essentially had to build the plane as we were flying it to put together the resources to challenge the administration many times in court. That infrastructure on the positive side is now in place. I was chatting with Bill Sherman on the environmental side upstairs before we came down. In January of 2017, the environmental enforcement team was Bill, and I think you said 1 investigator, okay? That team is now about 28 individuals, okay? This has been written about, the growth of our office in key areas. That growth of the office, which was very intentional, will be very useful over the next 4 years for many reasons, but this is one example. So our team is much larger, that has the experience and the resources to, when appropriate, to litigate. At the same time, though, the flip side of that is, and a concern I have, is that Donald Trump, I believe, and his administration may well be better prepared on their end. Just being honest, and many of you have heard me say this before, during his first administration, one of many reasons why we were successful with our litigation against the Trump administration was they were often sloppy in the way they rolled out their executive action, for example. And that provided openings to us to prevail in court. This time around, I anticipate that we will see less of that. And that is an important difference we may see. Number 2, of course, there are a number of judicial appointments at the U.S. Supreme Court. Obviously, the makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court is different today than it was in January of 2017. Similar with other courts in the federal system, that will present a challenge for us as well that we're aware of. Also, in his first administration, Donald Trump had individuals within his administration who clearly pushed back on some of what he wanted to do. There were voices within the administration who were interested in following the rule of law. I'm concerned, so I'm just speaking for myself, I'm concerned that there will be fewer, if any, of those voices in his next administration. So I want to be clear, and this is really important, the president has a lot of power. That's the way our system works. That's appropriate, okay? It was not unusual during Donald Trump's first term that I'd be stopped on the street by a Washingtonian saying, hey, can't you do something about X that has been happened back in Washington, D.C.? And my response would be, look, the president has a lot of authority, okay? My legal team is fantastic, okay? But when we would have conversations during those 4 years about whether to challenge something that was happening in D.C., it was not unusual, okay, to have a policy adopted that I had a strong view about, in opposition to, but we as a team did not feel it was illegal, that it was within his powers to do it. Well, if that's the case, that's the case, And a reason we were successful, I think, is we tried to stay very disciplined about that. Number 2, and I'll just be brief about this on the other tool that we have, is in enforcement, right? That, of course, I'm concerned that another Trump administration will not be as vigilant in enforcing environmental protections, for example, or civil rights enforcement. The good news is we have a team here in Washington State that can enforce our laws here in Washington State. Nothing that Donald Trump does or his administration does takes away our ability to enforce our rights here in Washington State, to protect our environment, to defend civil rights of all Washingtonians. And we are far, far better resourced to do that work than we were in January 2017, and that is putting it very mildly. I'm mindful that my role will be a little bit different starting in January. Happy to chat about that. That's not the focus of my remarks here. And just will conclude by saying that I didn't expect that we'd be back in this situation again, that won't be a surprise to you. But it became more clear about a year ago that that was a definite possibility. And so a message I just really have for Washingtonians is we're not just waking up yesterday thinking, oh my gosh, there's a Trump administration coming and we need to get ready for it. There has been a lot of work for many, many months from my team to prepare for this. We hope we wouldn't have to utilize their expertise in this area, but I felt it was very important that we get prepared. And I think a key reason we were successful in 2017, right from the beginning with the first Muslim travel ban, was after Donald Trump got elected, we started thinking about what his first administration would look like. And when the Muslim travel ban came down, the team was ready to go to work. And that's why we were able to file after a long weekend of work by the team and be successful in stopping that within a week. So the team's been working very hard. I want Washingtonians to know that. And I'm also very confident in Nick Brown, an individual I've known for a very long time, and want now to turn the podium over to the next Attorney General, Nick Brown.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you to AG Ferguson for inviting me to participate today. And I will just say it's been really nice over the last 48 hours to have such a seamless partnership with the future governor of the state of Washington. And he and his team have been very helpful for me to start to understand the landscape of the work that we have ahead of us. And I also want to say how thankful I am to be inheriting at least part of a very talented and extraordinary legal team, both staff and attorneys alike. I know that this is one of the best law firms, not only in the state of Washington, but in the country. And the track record over the last 12 years reflects that, not only in the affirmative litigation when it came to opposing the prior Trump administration, but the affirmative litigation that they've done on consumer protection, on civil rights and environmental protections and healthcare across the board has been absolutely extraordinary. And so I'm very thankful to be coming into an office that is so well suited for the work that we have ahead, certainly with the prospect or with the reality of a Trump administration, but in a myriad of other areas. This is an office that has so much talent, and I feel very humbled and lucky to be walking into this space and doing the work that we have in front of us. I will also say that I've learned a lot over the last year as a candidate for Attorney General, how much not only the people of Washington look to this office as a leader, but indeed the entire country. And as I got to know some of my future colleague Attorney Generals across the country, how much they have looked to Washington for leadership, and how much they know that we are an extraordinarily well-prepared and well-suited office for these challenges. And that is something that I think Washingtonians should take some pride on, is that this office is seen as a leader nationally with other states for taking on this work. So I'm very grateful for that as well. And you know, my last 6 months working with Governor Inslee as his counsel were the first 6 months of the first Trump administration. And I remember very vividly when the first travel ban came out and the work that this office did and to help prepare from the governor's office perspective for the challenges that we had ahead. And it was the first of very many lawsuits, the vast majority of which were successful in defending Washington values and defending rights and defending the people of this state. And like many of the people in this room and across the state, and sharing what Bob experienced as well, over the last day or so, I have been inundated with concern and people that are worried about the future, not only from people here in Washington. I will share that so many people and my friends and family members across the country have pinged me and just highlighted how this election, the election of A.G. Ferguson to governor, my election to take on this role, and many others, was a beacon of hope for many people. And I think it's a recognition that Washington has led, and my commitment is to continue to lead in this work ahead. And I know that the people are concerned about the potential actions that a second Trump administration might take. My commitment to this office and to all the men and women is that we will be prepared. We will be prepared for whatever comes, and we will do everything in our power to defend the rights of Washingtonians, the people of this great state, and to make sure that when there is an illegal action, that we will look very closely to see if we can bring a case, can we be successful, and can we continue to defend things that make Washington unique and make this the best state in the country. So there's a lot of things that we have to get up to speed on. There's a lot of work that I have to do personally to integrate myself and my team with the extraordinary people in this office. But I know that we will be able to hit the ground running because we've done it before and we're prepared to do it again. And it's very clear that AG Ferguson and his team has spent a lot of time thinking about what's next. And we will take those challenges very seriously and be prepared for the work ahead. So thank you again to AG Ferguson for including me, and I'm excited to get to work in January. Thank you.
Stay right here, don't go too far away. So we're happy, I know there's a lot of folks here. We'll do, for those on the phone, we'll try and take questions in the room first. We'll turn to folks back on the phone, and I think Nick and I would be available afterwards as well if there's questions. So feel free to jump in. Jim, go ahead, yeah.
You mentioned speaking with other attorneys general. I think can you give us a sense, have you had conversations, Zoom calls, telecom phone calls? Can you give us some idea of who you've spoken with?
Absolutely.
What you've charted out so far in terms of what actions you might take?
Yes, and I'll try and remember to repeat the question for those on the phone who may not be able to hear it. So the question is, summarizing hopefully well, is what kinds of conversations are happening with myself or with Nick with other attorneys general in their offices in anticipation of what may be coming. I guess, Jim, what I'd say is it's a little hard maybe to summarize, but for sure, so I'll start, Nick, and then let you go next. What I would say is that during the 4 years of the last Trump administration, obviously I'm having regular, direct conversations with other Democratic AGs all the time. That was just a part of the job. That has continued. I'd say starting about a year ago, initial conversations. Sometimes it's more formal, right? Sometimes it's just a phone call to check in with someone about a particular issue. I know that there was a conference of Democratic AGs here in Seattle, I think earlier this year, maybe it was last year, where I spoke and I gave a whole presentation about my experience, our collective experience, lessons learned from those years of litigating against Donald Trump. That was many, many months ago. I had that conversation, but it was to communicate to my colleagues what I thought were lessons learned from that experience. I'm also mindful that I don't believe that there will be a Democratic Attorney General starting in January who was an Attorney General in January of 2017. So in other words, the AGs who were there at the very, very beginning and who were very active, right? So others who came in during the Trump administration, but those early couple years were very busy. And so I wanted to share my perspective with those folks. So it's been that level of sort of formal communication to more informal, as you might imagine. And I also would want to emphasize much of the conversation has, of course, met the staff level, as you might imagine. And so that's just how we work. That's not especially unusual, right? If we have a big consumer protection case that's a multi-state, that same thing's happening. I'm talking to AGs and the team's talking to their, so that's a part of the process, and that has certainly been happening over the past year.
I was wondering, since the election, though, have you had a specific?
Oh, sorry. So my apologies, Jim. So the question, I guess, was more focused on since the election. To be honest, yesterday was a bit more of a slight of a day off for me, to be perfectly honest with you, Jim. So I've got a whole bunch of messages I need to recall. So no, I've not had, I think I can say yesterday there were none, but there will be a lot of conversations starting today that I'll be having with my colleagues for sure. Nick, anything you want to add on that?
Well, yesterday wasn't a day off for me, but after this will be a day off. And I've been AG-elect for 48 hours now, but immediately had outreach from other Democratic Attorney Generals excited about the work ahead, the opportunity to partner. And as Bob said, this work has been going not only with respect to the Trump litigation or Trump-related litigation, but many other areas as well as the Democratic AGs Association. There's some collaboration there, and that's very helpful. To be successful in some of this work, we need collaboration, we need partnership, we need multiple venues where we can bring potential litigation, but mine has been very nascent in those regards.
But actually, what I should add, Jim, is I have had some conversations with governors, and I hope if I don't get too specific on that, but those folks have obviously expressed the election results and conversations. That's been more in the realm of, hey, Bob, we appreciate your experience, right, with the Trump administration in the past, and look forward to having that experience brought to our conversations as governors in my new role. But I'm sure I'll be talking to my fellow AGs very, very soon.
Bob, I know
Yes,
I can
Chris,
appreciate
yeah.
you don't want to talk about legal strategies, but you've heard what this president has said and what has been talked about on campaign trail, the idea of mass deportations, using the National Guard to execute that. How does Washington State stop Donald Trump and his administration and a Republican Congress potentially from issuing the National Guard coming into Washington State and taking out mass deportations?
Yeah, so the way I would answer that, sorry, the question went to, for those on the phone, to potential use by President Trump of the National Guard for mass deportations, and what could Washington do, if anything, in that situation. And you're right, we won't sort of talk about specific legal strategy. What I would say, and I've obviously shared this with Nick, is our approach in the past with any action that Donald Trump did in his 4 years previously was really revolved around three key questions, okay? Is the action illegal, unconstitutional? Are Washingtonians being harmed? And do I, as Attorney General, have standing to go to court, right? And I'll spare you issues of standing, but a legal requirement we have to bring a case. If the answers to those three questions were yes, yes, and yes, then we filed a lawsuit every time without exception. Every time without exception. If there was a no in there, and there often was, then we did not file the litigation without exception. I think that discipline served us well. So in other words, one can be outraged by what's happening, but if, for example, we don't have standing to bring the lawsuit, well, somebody else has to challenge that, right? Or if it's not illegal, well, that's up to the people to decide who the president should be. You get the idea. So on each issue that that we were confronted with, that's how we approached it. I'll let sort of Nick share how he might view that as well, but clearly I'd be having a different role starting in January. We'd be deeply concerned by any action like that. I'm confident Nick and I would be having conversations about how he and the team feel about the constitutionality of that and what resources and tools we have to challenge that as appropriate. Nick?
Yeah, I would just echo, I mean, there are so many hypotheticals in a situation like that. What legal tools that President Trump may attempt to use, whether that's executive action or action supported by Congress. So it is really far too early to try to preview what a legal response to that might be. I think my analysis will be generally the same as been the one that's been used here in this office for many years. But I also just want to step back and, like Bob said, and like many of us, there are so many people right now in this state of Washington who are scared, who are fearful for themselves, for their family members, because of some of the outrageous things that have been said on the campaign trail by President Trump and his allies. And I'm very mindful of the concerns that all of them are facing. And it's going to be our obligation to make sure that we are defending the rights of everyone in Washington state, citizen and non-citizen alike, to make sure that their rights are not being violated. But that action could take a lot of different paths depending on what action is taken at the federal level. But we have been doing the work clearly in this office to prepare for a lot of different hypotheticals, and we will be prepared to face those with every tool that we have if it's appropriate.
And maybe just one last thing I'll add to that, Chris, is, my role will be different starting in January. So if this was to come to pass, and so I'm mindful that governors have sort of different tools. A bully pulpit, for example, right? When I was Attorney General, the way we expressed ourselves was primarily through legal filings and what we said in court, right? A governor has a different role, right, and can use a bully pulpit to articulate why a certain policy that may be implemented at the federal level is outrageous, right? Why it's harmful for our economy, why it's harmful for individuals, why it may be tearing apart families. You get the idea that, and look, I think you know me fairly well. I won't be shy about articulating my views, right? As Attorney General, I try very hard to be mindful of the law and stay within that realm of the way we talk about things. As governor, it's a little bit different, right? And in some respects, I can have a broader perspective and try to channel a bit what Nick is saying about the fears that folks may have if something like that were to come to pass, and also to work with other governors and our federal partners to see what we can do on that. Yeah, lots of hands. Sorry, so just go ahead. Yeah, we'll try and get to everybody. Sorry, go ahead.
Given the slate of legal action that you've taken against the first Trump administration, do you worry a second Trump administration may take retribution against Washington through grant funding or otherwise? And how would you combat against that?
So the question was, given our Washington's history in the first administration, Trump administration, of challenging successfully his policies, do we fear a certain retribution to Washington state with the next one. I think what I would say is that question came up quite a bit during the first 4 years. I remember being in this room and getting that question multiple times. I'll let Nick speak for himself. I'll just speak for myself. What I would say is that as Attorney General, there's a lot that's going on, right? And so my feeling always was, as Attorney General making those decisions, that really only those 3 questions mattered for my decision making. And I tried to be really disciplined about that. And those were things I could control, answering those 3 questions with my team, right? And I just felt, for me, I'm not trying to minimize the importance of your question. I want to be clear about that, or the potential harm that could result. I want to be clear about that. I'm not unaware of it, but I just felt that could not be part of my decision-making process. What someone else might do in reaction to what I think is the right decision, especially because we're making decisions in which people's rights are being violated, our environment's being harmed. That's what's core and that's what's important. So while I'm not unmindful about potential results or responses to the actions of the state of Washington, I just really feel strongly that it's important to stay focused on making a good decision on each case and not let those things influence the decision. That doesn't mean, again, in my next role, that, hey, maybe I would have a role in trying to prepare for that or try to minimize that, right? But as Attorney General, I try to stay pretty focused in that area. Nick, anything you want to add on that?
Well, I would just say, first, I understand the question too, and a lot of people have raised it for me in a different context as well. The simple fact that question is on the table is a real testament to the type of person that the United States of America just elected. But the United States of America did just elect that person, including 40-something% of the state of Washington. And I think, like Bob has said, it is very important that we continue to try to enforce the law. And if you look at the track record of this office over the last many years and during the Trump administration, the vast majority of the cases that were brought were successful, which means courts in this state and in the federal courts as well found that the President of the United States administration violated some law or some constitutional principle or harmed people unjustly. And I think we should continue to try to prevent and respond to that. So if there are future actions where we think the law has been violated or Washingtonians are harmed, we should absolutely bring those cases. I think to do otherwise would be a real dereliction of duty on behalf of me and the rest of the people in this office. If people are being harmed, if the law is being violated, we should enforce that without fear of retribution from the President of the United States or anybody else in this state or the country.
Yeah.
On abortion, who knows what's going to come out of Congress and what challenges may come out of Washington State. But in your 2 positions, how do you see that issue coming up? Will you pursue a constitutional amendment? Are there other laws that you would pursue to protect that right here in the state?
Sure. So the question went to reproductive freedom and what might we do to protect that, or even to increase protections by a potential constitutional change to the state constitution. I guess what I'd start with is, Washingtonians are very clear about their views on reproductive freedom. They take that very seriously, express that in the ballot box through the initiative process, and it's very clear where the overwhelming majority of Washingtonians are on that. So my role as governor, which I think is kind of what you're asking, and role as governor is to make sure that I am doing everything within my power to protect those rights. You mentioned the possibility of a change in our state constitution, which I support. Whether or not there are sufficient votes in the state legislature for a change of state constitution, which obviously requires a much larger majority, is a different question and more practical. I tend to focus my efforts on what I think is practical, what can actually be achieved. And so for me, that'll be what drives that specific question that you're asking is, hey, would we pursue that avenue? That said, our state constitution has, as you know, a state constitution can provide additional protections beyond what's provided under federal law, and And I think there's a strong argument that our state constitution's right to privacy grants those additional protections. So clearly, if something were to happen, use of the Comstock Act, whatever it might be, obviously we would be prepared for that. A lot of time has been spent thinking about that. And look, we're not shy about taking on any administration. You know, we're in the middle of litigation around access to mifepristone with the Biden administration, as you know, right? We were the state that took on the Biden administration for limitations around access to mifepristone, which is the abortion medication used in more than half of abortions, right? So regardless of who's in the White House, that is something that this team takes very, very seriously. Nick, anything you want to add on that? Okay. Yes.
Unrest in the region in 2020 drew attention and some inflammatory remarks from then President Trump and calls from his allies to intervene. And most recently, he's floated the idea of using the military against who he deems enemies from within. Now, he's included who he calls far leftists in that definition. That's a term he previously used to describe citizens right here in Seattle. So what is the Attorney General prepared to do, and you as well, Governor-elect Ferguson, if Trump acts on that statement?
So the question goes to Donald Trump's use of the phrase "enemies from within," and what could Nick do as Attorney General, or I could do if the president was to act on that in some way. I mean, I'm not sure I can add much beyond what I've said earlier about how we respond to actions by the federal government. I will just say one thing, though, is that from my perspective, just really speaking less as an Attorney General now, just to be honest, more as just a Washingtonian, obviously I happen to find much of what Donald Trump to say deeply concerning. I will say that his comments around enemies within, I find especially, I don't have a word for it. I mean, it's deeply un-American, deeply un-American. So, our system, let me put it this way. One thing as difficult as the Trump administration was in those 4 years before, one thing that I appreciated was the idea that we as a team could go to court, challenge him, and beat him, and stop these things from happening. That the system allowed for that to happen. I mean, it's incredible when you think about it, right? And so I would often tell my kids that, right? Hey, you live in a country where your dad can do that, right? And don't take that for granted. Don't take that for granted. That's not every country. And so, it goes to everything we're talking about, is that ability to, hey, the election did not go the way I wanted, okay, right? That's a fact. But hey, you wake up the next day and you go to work as a country, and you have your disagreements, and there are ways to express those, and the courts is one of them. And so, look, obviously, if he acts on that in a way that is illegal and un-American, obviously I'll have thoughts about that as the governor, and would do everything I could to protect whatever individuals would be under attack. I certainly hope, obviously, it doesn't come to that, but I did find those words to be especially concerning, and that's an understatement. Nick? Okay. Sorry, we have lots of hands here. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Go for it. Don't go for it. Yeah, yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit, the amount of work that it took during the first Trump administration to respond to the actions of the administration and challenge those? To what extent does that either distract your office or prevent the office from focusing on what would otherwise be sort of its bread and butter mission within Washington State?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. The question is, to the extent that the work, for example, during the first Trump administration that was expended, right, the time, the resources spent on challenging those policies, how much does that take away from, I think what you said, bread and butter work of the office? Good news is, did not. By any fair measure, the work of our office during those 4 years on what you would describe as our bread and butter issues expanded. Jim wrote a lengthy article about that, right? We've expanded our civil rights team, which did not exist, by the way, before I was Attorney General. Now it's a team of close to 30 individuals, right, doing civil rights work on behalf of the people. Those cases go forward here in Washington State, but also Colleen and her team do an amazing job of, hey, challenging that first Muslim travel ban and many other issues as well. So we've grown the team I've chosen to grow the team for many reasons, but part of it is, to your point, right, we're going to continue doing the bread and butter work that we do. In fact, we've expanded that work dramatically. consumer protection, pick your issue. But at the same time, having the resources to do this very important work as well. So I don't see those things as mutually exclusive. Now, that said, I will say that for the Trump litigation during those 4 years, for me, individual, obviously that took some of my time, right? We're not filing a lawsuit against the president unless I'm deeply involved in that, right? So we're having many conversations as a team. I'm reviewing briefs. We're having many conversations about, I'm just mindful that if we're filing a lawsuit during those 4 years against the president, I think the people of the state of Washington reasonably expect that I am making that decision. I'm very familiar with the case and the legal theory and can talk about it, in depth. And so that was the approach I had. So obviously it took some of my time, right? But that's just the nature of the job. You never know, month to month, week to week, day to day, hey, things come up and you got to deal with that. And that's what it was like for those 4 years. Nick, anything you want to add on that?
Well, I wasn't obviously in this office, but because I was working with Governor Inslee and have served as a special assistant attorney general in a number of cases, I would agree. I think we need to be able to tackle all of the challenges and expectations that the public in Washington has. But I will say that you don't really have a sense of how hard this office has worked. And I've solved just a fraction of it, but the Trump litigation and a lot of the affirmative litigation was countless weekends, long nights spent here. And I think the Washington public should have an appreciation for that, both staff and lawyers alike. It takes a lot to bring those cases and to be successful. It's a much larger team now that's prepared for that. But given sort of the spectrum of things that could be on the table with the second Trump administration, I don't want to undermine the value that these men and women are providing for the people of the state of Washington, because having been a government lawyer for most of my career, there's a lot of skeptics about how hard government people work, right? It's a 9-to-5 job. It is absolutely not, particularly given the significance and importance of the work that's happening here. So it will come at tremendous personal and professional sacrifice for these people to do that work. But we are prepared for it, and we will make sure that we meet the challenges. And if we need more resources to do that, I happen to know the next governor of the state of Washington, and I will be asking him for additional help.
Yes.
Hey, John Ferguson. I'm curious, there was a certain level of animosity between this state and the White House during the first Trump administration. I remember the president calling Governor Inslee, a snake at one point. Mm-hmm. I'm curious how you plan to approach this situation, how much you see yourself taking on an adversarial role, how much you are eager to fight whatever might be coming.
I guess what I would say is that my approach is sort of not to seek an adversary relationship. But if anyone, takes an action that harms Washingtonians, well, obviously it's my job as Attorney General to do something if we think it's illegal, right? So I'm not seeking that out. I want to be clear. Hey, I hope to God, okay, I pray that the things we're talking about don't come to pass. Wonderful, okay, wonderful. If this team never has to file a single lawsuit against Trump administration, no one will be more happy than me, okay, to be very, very clear. So, I want to be thoughtful about your question. I understand what you're asking, but that's just not the way I think about it, right? It's just not the way I think about it. And so, but I'm not naive, right, to how the 4 years went before. And I think we just have to, what we just try to do is focus on the cases, right, and focus on the law. I know that may sound sort of boring in a way, right, but that's just how the decisions get made around here. They have to, or you're going to lose a lot of cases, and we do not lose very often around here. Yeah, thanks. So let's maybe go to the phones for a couple of folks have them, and then I can come back around if folks have follow-up. I know it's gone a little long, but if you're on the phone, so I know it's easy for folks to speak over each other, but if you don't mind just identifying yourself, if you have a question, feel free to go for it. confidentiality about this, and as one example. And so we'd be taking a similar approach, right? Is the administration doing something that is illegal, right, in a way that harms Washingtonians? And so that's just a lens that we have to look through it, and would certainly be the lens that I'd be looking through it. You know, in my next role in January, obviously, be working with our federal partners and everybody we could to avoid a conflict along those areas. But that is certainly on our short list of things that we're concerned about. Nick, is there anything you want to add? Okay.
Well, Bob, would you be prepared to lose a lot of funding?
Well, no, I'm not prepared to lose a lot of funding, is the short answer. And I mean, it's just difficult to answer, Nina, right? Because it just, what does that look like, right? How is that being done? We've obviously had a lot of thought gone into that issue here in our office, to be sure. And so we would be prepared if we felt that what the administration was doing was illegal to push back on that, and we feel we'd have good arguments along those lines. I mean, I know it's a little bit of a, we obviously can't sort of preview legal strategies or what our arguments might be. I hope you understand that. That's just, you know, that just has to be a part of this. You know, I hope you understand that as well. Anybody else on the phone have a question?
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Melissa Santos at Axios. Given that the Northwest Detention Center, or whatever it is called now, is here in Washington State, should some of these mass deportations that the President-elect is talking about commence somehow, what options does Washington State, or might Washington State have for intervening in something that's sort of a federally contracted facility like that, even if it's within our state,
Yep.
when it comes to some of these immigration plans?
Good question. So, Melissa, you know, when I mentioned, I think in my earlier comments, you know, I emphasized the president has a lot of authority, right? And certainly when it comes to issues related to immigration, right, the federal government has a lot of authority. That's a good example of that being the case, and we're mindful of that. That's not unlimited, right? We won the Dreamers case, for example, at the U.S. Supreme Court. So we have experience in this, but you know, your point is well taken, right? That when it comes to immigration issues, the federal government does have a lot of authority. That said, and this question went earlier, I think we heard a similar question around mass deportations. Obviously, the impact on our state from something like that, individuals, families, et cetera, would be profound. Impacts on our economy. And so we'd be, you know, at the risk of stating the obvious, would be monitoring that closely. And if we felt that, you know, if we as a state felt that what was happening was illegal, obviously we'd be prepared to potentially take action. Nick, is there? Okay. Maybe one more from the phone line if anybody has it. If not, any last questions here before? Oh, let me take one more, Jim. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry. Yep. No, go ahead if you're on the phone.
Mitchell Rowland from the Chronicle. This is a broader question. So, Attorney General Ferguson, you alluded to the fact that Washington purchased a 3-year supply of mifepristone last April. I was wondering if you're able to speak to any of the other potential safeguards that the state has already taken or could take in the next 2.5 months to prepare for the Trump presidency.
In terms of mifepristone specifically?
More broadly, just in any other area that the state has already taken any preemptive actions to kind of safeguard Washington from the incoming administration.
Well, I know Governor Inslee had a press conference, I believe, yesterday in which he spoke about you know, from his perspective as the governor and his role. Obviously, up till today, my focus has been, you know, as Attorney General, obviously, for obvious reasons, and that's what we're talking about today. Obviously, I'm beginning a transition period, and what will be a not insignificant part of that transition preparation will be exactly your question. Hey, what steps can I be taking when I take office in January, working with the legislature? What steps can we take to provide additional protections as we see appropriate? So I don't know if I can preview those for you right now, but I do think your point about the governor working with the legislature to purchase a multi-year supply of mifepristone is a really good example of what a governor can do. I remember having very clear conversations with my team and his team about when we filed our mifepristone litigation and saying, hey, you know, no guarantees we're going to win, right? We feel we have good arguments, but cases are litigation is unpredictable, to put it mildly, and so he obviously took action to take additional steps in case that litigation did not go well. And so I think it's just a good example of tools a governor has to have additional layers of protection. Obviously, as I transition into a new role, I'll be giving greater thought to that in light of the way the election went on Tuesday.
Can I add one thing?
Oh, yeah, and then Nick's going to add something. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, I would just add, we rightly, I think so much of our collective national attention goes to the presidency and the impact that a presidential administration can have. And we should be prepared to respond that, in my perspective as the AG-elect, prepared to use this office to respond to that. But I would also add that I think the vast majority of the things that we as Washingtonians think about, worry about, or concerned about on a day-to-day basis are the issues that are happening here in Washington and how Washington law can be improved, both our legal protections and policy development, to make sure that this remains one of the best places in the country to live. And one of the ways that we need to continue to prepare for some of the challenges that we might face from a Trump administration is by continuing to improve Washington policy when it comes to environmental protections, continuing the track record that the legislature has been on the last many years, strengthening the work that we do here, and using the Attorney General's office to make sure that we're enforcing those provisions, continuing to strengthen the protections that we have for LGBTQ people in this state, protections that we have for our immigrant communities in this state, continuing to strengthen the gun safety laws that we have in this state. So regardless of what Trump administration tries to do, that we have the best foundation here to make sure that we're protecting people in Washington and doing everything we can as some of the leaders of this state to improve people's lives. So I understand the focus on the Trump administration, but I want to make sure that this office, in partnership with the governor's office and all the state and local leaders across the state, are focusing as well on what can we do here? What can we do to continue the work, regardless of it's a Trump administration or a Biden administration? And that's going to be a big part of the work that we have going forward as well.
Thanks, Nick, for mentioning that. I mean, that is 100% correct, right? This office, for example, can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? As governor, I can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do those things. And the question earlier about, hey, the bread and butter of our work, we didn't just maintain it, we expanded that while also, helping lead the country and hold Donald Trump accountable to the rule of law. And that is an important point. We understand the focus. I mean, we understand what we're hearing from many Washingtonians right now in the aftermath of the election. But that is correct. We're going to be able to move Washington forward as an office here and as the officer in general, and also as a state as a whole, while also taking appropriate steps when it comes to the next administration. Okay, maybe let's do one or two more, and then we got to wrap up. Yeah.
Might sound strange, but I just want to ask you: do you know anybody personally who voted for Donald Trump? Have you spoken with them?
Sure. Of course. No, I'm only laughing. Of course I do. Yeah.
Do you feel the need
Yeah.
in the national
Yeah.
results to understand the mandate that he has and
Yeah.
to some extent respect it, or
Yeah.
are you in full resistance mode?
Well, first, on your first question, of course, I know plenty of folks who vote for Donald Trump. I mean, I don't want to get too specific for obvious reasons, but my kids are involved in sports. I go to their sporting events. There are parents there. We hang out. We find a way to get along despite perhaps having a political disagreement on who the president should be, right? We focus on what we have in common, right? Our kids' sporting endeavors. And I invited those folks to my election night celebration on Tuesday night, to be clear, okay? I appreciate that. I was in a car ride yesterday with my daughter going to a softball practice. She was talking about one of her teammates supports Donald Trump. They are close friends. And I appreciate the fact that she focused on that it wasn't the fact, look, she supports her dad, she's got her own political views, but she talked about it, and I was pleased to hear the way she talked about it, right? That's a teammate, they're friends, they hang out together, they socialize together, they have a disagreement on that, but they hang out together. And so, of course, I'm from a large family, of course. And in terms, sorry, the second part of your question, Jim, was?
Just, you talked about the preparation. Do you feel any need to sort of understand the mandate from the other end, or are you just, is it 100%, is there any bridge building effort on the official side, or is it just 100% preparation for opposition?
Oh, look, I would be failing miserably, speaking as a governor, I guess, for the moment, right? I'd be failing miserably as a governor if I was in a full opposition mode. you know, one just has to compartmentalize certain things, right? That, of course, it is entirely possible I'll have a lot of disagreements with the next president. But I'm mindful, I think, Nick, you mentioned, hey, a not insignificant number of Washingtonians voted for Donald Trump, right? I get that. And I know it's my, you know, it has to be more than a cliche to say that I'd be a governor for all Washingtonians, right? That has to be a reality. And I think, Jim, you will see that I'll be very active in traveling to all corners of the state as a governor. Being in front of rooms where a lot of folks in the room disagree with me on political issues. I've never been shy about those conversations. You know, I remember during the Trump years specifically, I've been to every Rotary Club in the state. Many of those were visited during the Trump years. And many of those were in very red parts of the state, where Rotarians were very polite to me, but there were a lot of folks sitting there with their arms folded as I was talking about our work, right? But we had a conversation about it, right? Kind of like we're having a conversation right now. And I'm not saying they agree with everything I said about why we were doing what we were doing, but hopefully I was providing a three-dimensional view, and I was hearing from them a three-dimensional view of issues they cared about as well. So, you know, that to me is more than cliche. I enjoy that. I enjoy traveling the state. I enjoy hearing from all folks. I think that's very important. So no, it's not. I think the phrase, it's not full opposition mode. That's not. I wouldn't describe that in any way, shape, or form, right? You know, as a governor, you have to make sure you're hearing from everybody, and making sure that those voices are guiding decisions that you're making. Okay, we appreciate all the questions. We know there might be more. I want to thank Nick again for being here. I think he's going to be a great Attorney General. I'm super excited. We had a chance to work together, obviously, during his years with Governor Inslee, so we know each other well. And I think everybody here is really excited for what he brings, you know, to the office and his experience. So I'm super excited about that and the partnership and working with him on, obviously not just these issues, but many as well. And I'll just conclude by, you know, thanking the team here in the office who, you know, Nick, you're right, they work extraordinary hours, not just on issues related to Donald Trump, although that was an especially challenging time for us as an office and demanding as well, but the team does extraordinary work. And I'm confident. There are a lot of things I worry about when I go to sleep at night, but one thing I do not worry about is this team and their abilities to make sure that everybody follows the rule of law, and I'm confident that it's not going to change. Thanks so much for being here, everybody. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Nick. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks, you guys.